Number 7. The puppy in the Siberian mud. In 2018, men digging for mammoth tusks on a riverbank in Yakutia pulled out a lump of frozen dirt with fur on it. Inside was a puppy, about 2 months old. He still had his nose, his teeth, his eyelashes, and his whiskers. He had been dead for 18,000 years. They called him Dogor, which means friend in the local language. So why is he in one piece? Permafrost is ground that stays frozen all year, and in Siberia, it runs hundreds of meters deep. Animals that fall in tend to die suddenly and get buried fast in wet silt that freezes around them. No air gets in. Bacteria cannot do their work in ground that cold. The body is not really preserved. It is paused. Scientists read his DNA and still could not settle whether he was a wolf or an early dog. He may sit right on the line between the two. Now the part that matters. Dogor was not found by scientists. He was found by tusk hunters. Warm summers are collapsing those riverbanks, and a whole trade now lives off the ivory falling out of them. The bodies are coming out because the ground is losing its grip. One of the men further down this list came out the same way, with a flint arrowhead still stuck in his shoulder. Number 6. The cave lion cubs. Cave lions went extinct around 10,000 years ago, and we know what their whiskers look like. 2 cubs came out of the permafrost in Yakutia, one in 2017 and one the next summer. Researchers named them Boris and Sparta. Sparta may be the best preserved Ice Age animal ever found. She still has her fur, her claws, her teeth, and the soft tissue of her face. She was 1 or 2 months old when she died. Her body is about 28,000 years old, and Boris is closer to 43,000. Neither cub was chewed on, so they were not killed and eaten. The likely story is a den collapse, a wall of mud and silt coming down on them while they slept. Death and burial happened in the same minute. That is the only way a whisker survives. Until these cubs, this animal was known from broken bones and from paintings people drew while it was still hunting them. Now we have the animal itself, with its coat still on. Number 5. The bodies on Everest. More than 300 people have died on that mountain, and most of them are still up there. The reason is not cruelty, it is altitude. Above 8,000 meters, the air holds about a third of the oxygen you get at sea level. A climber up there can barely carry their own body. Carrying somebody else's is out of the question. So the dead stay where they fell, in dry air far below freezing. They do not rot. They dry out and harden, jackets and boots still on. Then, climbers started using them. On the northeast ridge, a man in bright green boots lies curled inside a small limestone cave. Climbers called him Green Boots. For years he was a distance marker. You passed him and you knew how much mountain you had left. He was probably a young Indian climber who died in the storm of 1996. Around 2014 he went out of sight, but the mountain is handing people back. As the ice thins, climbers keep finding bodies that went missing decades ago, working their way out of the glacier. That is the pattern behind everything on this list. Ice does not keep things. It delays them. Number 4. The man in the gully. In September 1991, 2 hikers in the Alps saw a head and shoulders sticking out of the meltwater. They assumed it was a climber who had died there a few years earlier. The body was 5,300 years old. He is called Utsi. He was about 45, 5'3", and he was carrying a copper axe. Here is how he lasted. He did not lie on top of the glacier. He lay in a rock gully a few meters deep, and it filled with ice that held him below the glacier moving above. That ice slid past him for 5,000 years and never ground him up. Now the injuries. There is a flint arrowhead in his left shoulder. It cut an artery and he bled out in minutes. Someone pulled the shaft out and left the head in. On his clothes and his weapons, researchers found blood from 4 different people. 2 on one arrowhead, 1 on his knife, 1 on his coat. He was not caught in a storm. He was hunted. And we only know because one warm summer melted a murder scene older than the pyramids. The next body on this list still had liquid blood in it when they cut it open. Number 3. The mammoth that still bled. In 2013, a team digging on an island off the north coast of Siberia found a female mammoth in the ice. When they cut into the flesh under her belly, dark liquid ran out. It was blood, and it was still moving at 10 degrees below zero. Mammoth blood was built for the cold, and that may be why it never set. She is roughly 28,000 years old, and the team called her Buttercup. How she died is written in her body. Her back half was stuck in a peat bog. The front of her was torn at, which means predators reached her while she was still alive. She could not get out. She was eaten in place. Then came the interest. Tissue that fresh raised the question of whether a living cell could be pulled out of her. No mammoth cell has ever divided again. So the work moved to rewriting elephant DNA instead, and companies now promise a mammoth-shaped animal within years. The next thing on this list needed no help at all. It spent 46,000 years in a burrow, and then it started moving. Number 2. The worms that woke up. In 2018, researchers thawed soil from an old squirrel burrow in northeastern Siberia, and something in the dish began to crawl. They were roundworms, about a millimeter long. The burrow they came from sat 40 meters down, in ground dated to roughly 46,000 years ago. The worms fed. Then they reproduced. They survived this by shutting themselves down. The worm turns its own chemistry off, dries itself out, and stops being alive in any way you could measure. Nothing is ticking, so nothing wears out. It is not endurance. It is a switch. Worms are not the only ones. In 2023, a French team revived giant viruses from the same kind of ground, the oldest around 48,500 years, and they could still infect their targets. Note what those researchers chose to work with. They picked viruses that only attack amoebas, deliberately because they did not want to find out what an ancient human virus would do. All of that happened in a lab, on purpose, with people watching. Once, the ground did it by itself. Number 1. The reindeer that killed a boy. In the summer of 2016, the Yamal Peninsula in northern Siberia reached 35 degrees, which is not a temperature the Arctic is supposed to have. The top layer of permafrost thawed deeper than it ever had, and out of it came a reindeer carcass frozen since 1941. The animal had died of anthrax. Anthrax survives by making spores, and a spore is barely alive. It is a sealed package of DNA that can sit in soil for a century, then start growing the moment the ground is warm and open. In 2016, the ground was both. The spores got into the grass got into the herds, and more than 2,000 reindeer died. Dozens of people were taken to hospital. A 12-year-old boy died. Russia sent in troops in protective suits, burned the carcasses, and vaccinated tens of thousands of animals. But the burial pits from the old outbreaks are still out there, across ground that used to be frozen all year, and many of them were never mapped. That boy was killed by an animal that died 75 years before he was born. The ice was never protecting anyone. It was just holding the thing still, and it is letting go.